Welcome, everyone. Robert Nielsen here at Vargo, head of the commercial operations of Vargo. What that really means is our connections with accounts, the retailers, and we're also partnering very closely with the industry and the partners of automation technology in the marketplace. And I'm very pleased to deal with this topic today, which is the revolutionizing the retailing space where the consumer trends are driving the future supply chain strategy. It's a personal passion of myself to line our common journeys here, customers, partners, industry, etc., on the steps and the roadmaps to shape the future supply chain. And we're all living through a once in a lifetime situation here of the e-commerce wave going through our society. Very exciting time. Also, what I'm super excited is to have two highly regarded friends and professionals in the marketplace that will do some further in-depth introduction of themselves. But first, Dr. Terry Esper from the well-esteemed Ohio State University, really focused on the consumer trends as it relates to the supply chain. So a great partner for us here at Vargo, but also you on the phone here in the webinar. Another friend and professional of mine is Christian Dow, the Executive Vice President of MHI, really where the industry comes together. And he has a huge passion also for workforce development as well. So before I hand it over to their own introductions, the topics today will be focused on, again, the consumer-driven supply chain, also the driving force of what consumer deals with today of returns in this e-com world. And the last couple of topics we will discuss is packaging for both profit and the planet impacts it has to deal with the flow of parcels in our economy. Last, we will close out with connecting the enterprise for our supply chain customers. The retailers are connecting the physical world with the digital world. Housekeeping notes, so you feel comfortable here. We're recording this session. We will make this available to you afterwards, and you can share that then with your own enterprise employees and so forth. We will also address some questions at the end, and if we don't get to all your questions, we will make sure we answer those and make part of that as the recording availability after the event. So without further ado, I will first turn over here to Dr. Terry Esper, and pleased to have you. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Robert. So good to be here. And of course, I'm really excited to talk about this topic, a topic that is near and dear to my heart. In terms of my background, of course, now I am and I'm a professor at Ohio State. But in a former life, I worked in retail. I cut my teeth in Northwest Arkansas. It's a part of the Walmart ecosystem. And then went on to work for another major retailer. And I was there at that retailer when we first decided to stand up an online retail store. And so this was the mid-90s when there really was no blueprint. There was no template to follow. And so, I had the wonderful opportunity at that time to be on the front end of what we are now discussing today. And so it's really good that, for me, over the course of my 25 to 30 years of experience, to be able to really kind of reflect on how far we've come. When we first stood up that first .com fulfillment operation, again, we experimented, we figured it out as we went. And now I think we've got a lot more insights to really inform how consumers are impacting the way that we do retail. But not only that, the way that consumers are affecting the way that we do supply chain management. So I'm excited to be here, excited to be a part of the discussion, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you very much, Terry. And over to you, Christian. Great to have you. Please give us some of your background.
Sure. Thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me. It's been great to get to know you over the years, but then also Terry as well over the especially the last 6 months or so. Yeah. So I'm Christian Dow, the Executive Vice President for Industry Leadership and Workforce Development at MHI. And what that means for the industry leadership side is that we have about 18 subgroups, which are small associations under MHI. And then I lead two of them, the SLAM industry group, which is about order fulfillment, and the solutions community. So I got my SLAM shirt and my solutions community banner behind me. But before coming to MHI, I actually started my career at Sears Corporate years and years ago. So I've seen kind of what happens to retailers who don't get with the trends and don't adapt quickly, especially when Sears, growing up, Sears was the dominant player. But then also prior to MHI, I was president of Panther Industries, so very much in touch with the automated space inside the warehouse. So, but I get to be privy to a lot of conversations. And in fact, just recently we had our MHI roundtable. So a lot of these conversations were happening just this last weekend. And then also have a practitioner council where a lot of these topics come up. So this is a very interesting and constantly evolving topic that I'm looking forward to today.
Thank you both. Very pleased to have you, and we will make sure the audience will have contact and direct connections with you as well. So again, let's get started here. First topic that we're going to kind of discuss here is the consumer-driven supply chain. And Terry, this is one of the main focuses of your leadership there over at Ohio State. The organization is very focused on the consumer trends as it regards to the supply chain. So please, maybe we can open up with that topic. If you could share what you're learning, some of your findings, and where it's headed going forward.
Yeah, well, there's so much that we could talk about there. I think we have all kind of agreed in some capacity that consumers really are in the driver's seat when it comes to how we manage supply chains. And we've been talking for several years now about what's happening at retail and how what's happening in the retail echelon of supply chains really is driving what's happening across supply chains further upstream. And so, I have, as you alluded to, really been paying attention to what's happening in terms of consumer behavior, consumer insights, and really trying to dig into how this new consumer that we're seeing in the marketplace is affecting the ways that we manage supply chains. So just a few things. First of all, one of the things we've been really arguing quite a bit here at Ohio State is we've taken issue with this notion of being customer centric, and customer centricity is a very hot topic, and we see a lot of supply chain folks talking about how to be more customer centric and how important it is to be customer centric. And I'll never negate that. I think that is important, but we've been really kind of taking it up a step, and we've been calling for supply chain folks to be more consumer centric. And really our argument has been that we really need to start placing what's happening with consumers in terms of the way that consumers behave, the way that consumers process information, their sentiments, their perceptions, and their preferences. That needs to be centered in terms of how we're managing supply chains. And it's not only for retail, right? One of the things we've been really arguing is that, when it comes to the way that we procure materials, the way that we design manufacturing processes, all of that needs to be taking into consideration what's happening with the end consumer. And so we've been really pushing for supply chain management to be much more consumer driven and consumer centered, because we do see that that's where a lot of the action is, and that's where things are headed. If there's no further indication that that's where things are headed, of course, all eyes are on Gen Z and the way that Gen Z as a consumer group behaves significantly different than those of us that maybe have a few grays in the beard, and we're seeing some significant differences with the ways that consumers in the Gen Z category or generation, the way they think about things. I mean, these are digital natives. These are consumers that have had access to mobile devices. They've had access to the internet. They've had access to social media for their entire life, right? So just their whole worldview is different. And so we've been watching that, and I know we will be able to peel back the layers of what that means. But there's a new consumer on the horizon, and it's shaping how we need to be thinking about supply chains differently. And then the last thing I'll share before I turn it over to open up the conversation, one of the really compelling data points that I've really been latching on to undergird this idea that we need to be more consumer centric. There was a study done by Salesforce.com some years ago, and it was a survey of business buyers. So this was business to business. This was not retail. This was B2B engagement. And what this study found is that somewhere close to 85% of business buyers started to want more of a consumer-like experience when they purchased from their suppliers, right? So to even go further than that, roughly 70% of those who were surveyed said they want to feel like they're shopping at Amazon when they're working with their suppliers in the supply chain. So what that means is that what's happening in the consumer space and what's happening in terms of consumer trends is not only affecting retail, but it's also affecting how corporate business buyers are engaging with their suppliers. And so if there was ever an indication that consumerism is affecting supply chain, it would be that data point, that business buyers want to engage with their suppliers in a fashion that's similar to how they buy their everyday consumer products. So I'll turn it over there.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment there. Maybe a small question for you, Terry, before I go to Christian.
Sure.
I'm loading up a big question for him here shortly, but can you give me an example? AI is all over the news. So give me some interesting thing on the consumer from an AI utilization perspective.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I did not attend it, but the NRF's big show was just a few weeks ago. And all the buzz coming out of NRF was the agentic consumer experience and how agentic AI is really shifting the way we think about the way we shop and the consumer experience. Interestingly enough, as I heard some folks kind of summarizing things, like a year ago at the NRF big show, agentic AI was just kind of tangentially mentioned, whereas this year it was front and center and all the buzz. Just to show what a difference a year could make in terms of artificial intelligence. But what this agentic AI conversation is really all about is this idea that consumers will now be able to kind of have an agent, if you will, that is scanning and sensing and shopping on their behalf. And so there's a lot of discussions about what this means in terms of consumers going from browsers to find products to kind of supervisors of these AI agents, if you will, to find them the products that they want. And so it is fundamentally changing the way that consumers are shopping and the ways that we should be thinking about how to target consumers. Now, there are a lot of discussions about what is this agentic AI consumer journey going to mean from a supply chain perspective. Here's just one example. I was reading an article a couple of days ago about a company that was indicating that they were starting to get a lot more sales for products that they didn't have in stock. And a lot of these sales were generated by kind of the agentic AI pathway, where maybe the technology is quite not sophisticated enough yet to be able to really sense inventory availability, to be able to sense and look for in-stock levels. And so this particular retailer, which was a smaller retailer, experienced a lot of heartache with having to grapple with a lot of service failures, dealing with a lot of stock out management. And all of these purchases were based on kind of an agentic platform. So it's a sweet technology. We're watching it to see where it goes. It's really exciting to think about this idea that you can have AI kind of purchasing on your behalf or doing kind of autonomous replenishment of your day-to-day consumer goods. But the effects that it'll have on the supply chain, there's a lot there that we're still working through, and it's just one of the hottest topics right now when we think about how AI is shifting this whole space.
This is very interesting, Terry. I mean, this will set the stage for the rest of the webinar here in our topics, and this is transforming the retail ecosystem. So I told you, Christian, that loaded up a big question for you. So what is all of this going to do to our operations? Sorry about that very broad question, but that's probably top of mind for a lot of us here. So over to you, Christian.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what Terry's talking about, and then also just different AI platforms to figure out how to serve the market. So whether or not there are forecasting based on sales, based on advertising going on in social media and things like that their retailers have to prepare for. There's now AI that's impacting operations from a standpoint of doing weather forecasting and other kinds of bringing in other things like that are taking into account what's happening in the on more of a global basis or a national basis. So think about the weather impact of this week, and and just the change for. We had one retailer last week tell me that their pet food went up incrementally because everybody went and bought pet food knowing that they wouldn't be able to get to their store in within a week or two, and so they stocked up. It was a combination pet food and hardware store, and so a lot of shovels and other things also were purchased at that time, salt and everything else, and they had just on I think it was Saturday alone had 3 times the sale from this time last year. So their numbers just went crazy just because of the storm. But knowing what's coming, knowing how to forecast that, how to prepare for whatever it is on the horizon that people are going to need to adjust to is a big part of that. But I think a lot of what operations need to do is prepare for a lot of this is really shoring up their operations, having visibility on inventory earlier and more often, requiring less touches through a facility, making sure that you are optimized. One of the themes that came out of our discussions this last week with 6 practitioners that participated in the MHI roundtable was something that I hadn't heard before. And it's called the flattening of the peak. So Black Friday is no longer Black Friday. Black Friday is a month. Yeah. And so there was no peak time where you can just scale in and bring in labor and you can bring in, kind of a full charge. It was like this, kind of raised month or quarter that people are preparing for now. And so it's really a big change over what we had seen with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and the like in the past, where now it's just not, it isn't a single event, a single day, a single sale. Sales are now, instead of days, they're a month. They start earlier, they end later, and have those, kind of those challenges now to figure out, okay, how do we solve those challenges versus what we've been doing for the last, decades.
Great points there, Christian. And let's go a little bit deeper here. Looking at the holiday season, you basically have the classical e-commerce growth. The penetration of e-commerce is at all-time high and it's going to continue.
That's right.
It grew at double digits year over year. And also retail overall is growing. So let's go down to like omnichannel, right? That's lots of things that needs to be coordinated with these two things that you're both pointing out from a consumer trend perspective and operations. But what strategies and other things do you see retailers are debating and doing or adjusting in a kind of an omni-channel world, which is the all encompasses retail and e-com and combination of the both? But Christian, what could you share from a strategy perspective? What are you seeing? What are some of the retailers talking to you about?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, you're absolutely right. This is the first time in December that e-commerce surpassed the peak during COVID, and I think we're going to continue to look forward and see that it's going to continue to grow as a percentage of e-commerce sales, which retail, or as a percentage of retail. And so retail will continue to grow, and then the percentage of e-commerce will continue to grow. And so really, when you look at those things together, it just shows where we're going. And I think that customer centricity that Terry talked about is going to become more and more important for retailers to be able to differentiate themselves through e-commerce from the players that already have dominant positions, right? So trying to figure out, okay, how do I fulfill this order the best way I possibly can? One of the strategies that our retailer members in our conversation this last week had was delaying orders to make sure you get a collection of things that are happening, kitting, and being able to fulfill things in a way that's best for the consumer, making sure that you're reducing packaging. sustainability has dropped down in importance a little bit according to our upcoming annual industry report, but it's still one of the top 10. It's still very important, and I think it's still something that we need to that the retailers need to keep in their perspective. But to Terry's point, the consumer, you really need to focus on the millennial and Gen Z generations, and they want things where it makes sense. They want things to be more sustainable. They want things to be, less friction. They want things to be able to be available more digitally. And I agree completely with the AI agents. I see people that are using AI instead of search engines completely, which has its challenges because you're still getting those incorrect and exaggerated answers. But a lot of times you can kind of unlock or uncover things easier using AI and try to figure things out. How do these things work? How do I buy these things together? How do I know what to do with this when I get it? And a lot of times an AI agent can help with those kind of things. So from the omni-channel perspective, one of the other insights I saw that from recent discussion is the concept of BOPIS. And I thought that this had gone away in COVID. I thought people stopped doing the buy online, pick up in store, and that's what that stands for. But apparently it's something that is kind of rejuvenating, that there's a reason. I think retailers are giving a reason to go back to the store. And so you end up ordering it, having it delivered to the store. You go and pick it up and you spend time in the store, either picking up additional things, or in the case of like a Barnes and Noble or other retailers, they make environments that are more experiential. There's a coffee shop inside, there's other things to do there, and people are getting back to going to the store for those reasons. Obviously for grocery, you can save a lot of time. Focus on the things you need to pick out individually, like your produce and your meat, but then you can go and get a lot of those other things picked off the aisles and delivered to you, so you don't spend as much time there for those kind of things. But I thought that was an interesting concept, and it probably is also due to things like porch piracy and the other kind of things that happen. Maybe people are living in cities, just don't have the ability to have things dropped off and left at their door or access to their facility. So yeah.
Great.
Hey, Robert, can I jump into that
Yes, please.
That BOPA's conversation? It's interesting. I mean, that's been something that we've been watching for the last 6 to 7 years relative to BOPA's. And sorry, I'm getting a little bit of tech interruption there. Hopefully we hang out okay. But it's been intriguing, right? I mean, Christian, to your point, one of the reasons why BOPA's is so popular is because in most cases, that store pickup actually kind of negates the need for a 2-day delivery window. And so you do have the ability to get access to online orders quicker. And what we know for sure, and some of the research I've done over the years and what we've seen emerge out of these changing retail trends, is that speed will always be a major factor in it as it relates to how consumers go about making purchasing decisions. And speed is, of course, even more pronounced when it comes to Gen Z. Another thing when it comes to this idea of omni-channel, as we talk about these generational differences, I remember when I was working on some omni-channel research back in around 2015, 2016, and we were exploring kind of the way that, young people thought about stockouts. And I remember a group of young consumers saying, like, there's no reason why this should be out of stock when you have access to your entire network of product. And I paraphrase, but the idea was that, as a retailer, you should be able to have, immediate access to your entire network and should be able to offer kind of this endless fulfillment model where wherever the product is in the world, you should be able to grab it and get it to me. And, that is still a very widely held perspective in the retail marketplace. And so what that means is that those omni-channel capabilities, the ambidexterity, operationally, to be able to draw from inventories from different distribution centers, from different fulfillment centers, from different stores, that's still considered to be table stakes for the consumer marketplace, especially young consumers. And so it does lend to those omni-channel capabilities being, kind of the way that we think about how we serve today's consumer. Christian, I like that you talked about kind of the experiential side of brick and mortar retail. I remember years ago we had this whole retail apocalypse notion that the store was dying, if you recall, when we got really hot and heavy with online. That's just not the case. Again, even with the growing emphasis on online with younger consumers, the store will always have its place. But of course, as you alluded to, the role of stores has now changed quite significantly, becoming much more of a distribution node, as well as a place for consumers to experience products and to engage with products. So again, a lot of changes there, a lot of dialogue when it comes to omnichannel. It's still definitely a hot topic. It's still the way that modern consumers are thinking about the pathway to the purchase. And again, those supply chain capabilities to be able to draw from a network of inventory availability is the way to go. And it's what consumers are expecting in the marketplace.
Thank you both. I mean, this is absolutely a going forward phenomena. The omnichannel is here to stay. It's core business. You have to keep that in mind. So I do want to move to the next topic, but briefly, Christian, what are you seeing from retailers, their strategies and their network strategy to deal with this omnichannel? Maybe a couple words on that, because yeah, this is such a big topic and you covered it well, both of you. But Christian, any trends or anything you've seen with retailers on their strategy and their network design, any activities that they are pursuing there?
Yeah, I definitely think that there's, one is we're leveraging, I think Terry put it perfectly in kind of reiterating what Terry was talking about, is utilizing your brick and mortar, if you have brick and mortar, as part of your fulfillment strategy. I mean, there's no reason if you're a stock out in a warehouse that a consumer can't get something. The other thing is exactly what Terry talked about as well. There's no reason that this should be stocked out. That if I'm, and a lot of times I think consumers will look, if I think of a retailer for outdoor goods. If I'm going to drive 30-40 minutes to an outdoor store, I want to make sure the thing I'm going there is there. Now everything else I can go and pick and see what the other things, I might have optionality to the things I'm looking for, but the core thing I'm going to drive 30-40 minutes for needs to be I need to make sure it's in that store, or maybe I have another option of a different location I can go to get it. And those things are really critical. And so I think a lot of this comes down to, it comes down to visibility, and in a strategy that comes down to your hardware and your software, right? Your software is going to orchestrate your systems. And so it's your ERP, and then your warehouse management, your enterprise software, or your execution software, and then your control networks, right? It's all these things that are working together. And it could be, include other software like your yard management, your transportation management, your labor management, to make sure all these things are working together. Really, you have to look at what are the consumer demands are on your business, and figure out what your strategy is going to be, and what are the things that are most important for you to be successful. And I think it's going to be different for whether you're in grocery, whether you're in clothing retail, or outdoor goods. Everything's going to be a little bit different. How much optionality is there? How much more likely are they to come and be okay with picking brand B or brand C, or option B or C or D for those purchases? So but I think the network strategy is really critical. I don't know that, on the larger end, I don't know if they're building more warehouses, or they're really looking to even dial back a little bit on those ends. But it gives that second and third tier retailer an opportunity to leverage more of their facilities and operations to do a little catching up.
Great. So now let's move to the next topic, which is also a paramount here in the retail world, right? Return processing has always been there. It's part of how we do retailing even before e-commerce, right? So let's drill into this one now. I consider this also a core strategy and things that a consumer will count on in this world of retail, omnichannels, and e-com in itself. So Terry, over to you in terms of consumer behavior and trends after they made the purchase, right? Can you start sharing some experiences as us as consumers at home or so forth when we deal with returns? How are we behaving? What are we expecting after the purchase?
Yeah, Robert, I'll actually start before the purchase because, one of the topics that I have enjoyed keeping track of is cart abandonment, right? And this, of course, is when people put a whole bunch of stuff into a cart and then decide, oh no, I'm not going to purchase, right? And we've been looking at the reasons behind that, and it has not been in the top. It's in the top 6 or 7 now reasons for cart abandonment returns, but it used to be in the top 3. And what I'm getting at is that if there's a perception that the ability to return a product will be would be burdensome, that'll affect whether or not consumers will even purchase. So the reality is that being able to project hassle-free returns, easy returns, especially in spaces like apparel, that's paramount even before consumers make purchases, because that is a part of the decision calculus that they're taking into consideration when even deciding whether or not to purchase from you. But what we do know is that, of course, returns are a big part of the of retail. It always has been a big part of retail. Of course, returns have become significantly pronounced since we saw the boom in online retail. And again, as someone who stood up an online retail fulfillment operation back in the mid 90s, it was one of the topics that, to be quite frank, we didn't even think about because we just didn't know that it would be such an important part of shopping online. One of the retailers that I've been paying a lot of attention to is a European pure play apparel retailer. And they're doing a lot of really interesting things with machine learning, with artificial intelligence to try to be much more predictive when it comes to returns. In a way, trying to engage proactively in what we might call returns mitigation or returns avoidance, really trying to predict, which products are likely to be returned and to try to intervene as best as possible to prevent returns from even having to take place in the first place. So, for example, we're seeing a lot of discussions, particularly within apparel, on size and fit and being much more strategic and much more proactive about being able to predict the ways that consumers, what sizes and what kind of fits they would prefer when it comes to products, and being able to offer that up during the initial purchase, and therefore reducing the likelihood that things will be returned. And so this retailer has a very interesting metric, and it is returns probability, or the likelihood of a return. And they're tracking that in order to try to figure out how to, on the front end, reduce the likelihood of a return. And I think it's just an indicator that with the more sophisticated technologies that we now have available, we can use these technologies to not only predict sales on the front end, but also predict returns on the back end, and try to be as savvy with the back end processes as we are with the front end processes.
Great points. And Christian, let's move to you here. The way I'm looking at this, basically the whole spectrum of how handling returns from an operational perspective. One extreme would be tell the consumer, just keep the product, keep the wrong product. To the other one, where you holistically are building that consumer experience on making the return to a DC very easy, or go to the nearest store and let the operations handle it from there. And then also from a sustainability perspective, you want to get this back into inventory so you're not wasting a product, if you will. So how do retailers balance this on basically the convenience of the consumer with operational cost? Again, I apologize, that's a very big question, but I'm seeing that this is not going to go away. The percentage is high, and we always are returning. So over to you on that one, Christian.
Yeah, and it goes. I mean, it's such a challenge for retailers. And I remember having a conversation with folks from Nordstrom who had very forgiving returns policy, and they were trying to figure out whether or not they, what to do with those people. And it turned out that if they fired their customer, it was a lot of their best customers that had these bracketing kind of practices. And I think things that Terry's talking about was very important in kind of mitigating that. the other thing is, what do you do with it when you get it back? And we've seen over the years the kind of the adaptation of strategies to make these opportunities, like when Kohl's made it an opportunity to partner with Amazon, so you could return any Amazon order to a Kohl's store and they'll handle the return for you. And I thought that was a genius way to get people to walk through their brick and mortar. Nowadays, you can go to any UPS store or have them come and pick it up at your house in a lot of cases. And so it just makes it a lot easier that there's not as much friction to get these things returned. The critical part now is, what do you do with that inventory once it is returned, for retailers? And I think, we've seen, and Robert, you and I have gone on some tours, we've seen a lot of things where returns come in. They need to be handled in a very quick manner. So they need to be repackaged, whether it's in sustainable packaging or some kind of resellable packaging, and needs to be kind of put in a, rather than being put all the way back into normal inventory places, maybe have forward pick where you can fulfill more immediately out of these locations, and try to reduce the automation, reduce the touch, not necessarily automation, but the touches that are happening to try to get these things reused on the market, or figure out what are the secondary markets for these things, if these retailers have these secondary markets for return goods. I've heard in discussions just a lot of different strategies of how, with things that are highly returned, it's kind of built into it that they know they're going to get this amount of returns, and they figure out how to resell or have sales on those items to get them back out on the market again. So there's a lot of different strategies. I think though that figuring out inside the operation what you can do to limit the touches, figure out how to repackage and put it back in a usable condition to resell, and then figure out how to get that as your first inventory back out. I think those are three key areas.
So before I go to Terry, a quick follow-up. So this really reverse logistics, and you really have to think about how do you optimize that cycle time, right? So what will be 2 or 3 things that you would point to that retailers are or should pay attention to deal with the cycle time of the reverse logistics? A couple of pointers there, Christian.
Yeah. I think that one of the things is, you look at just the Q&A part of it is really important, right? Because the customer experience on the next use of that product is very important, right? So if it's something that has a lot of parts to it, there needs to be Q&A. Make sure all the parts are included in that. If it's a piece of clothing, you need to make sure that there's no tears, there's no wear, there's no identifiable imperfections to it, which might have been the cause for returns in the first place. And that could be captured on the return request as well, and make sure you're carrying that data through. So I think those are a couple areas that are important. As we talk about the storms, people will get snowblowers and then return them and saying they didn't use them, and of course there'll be gas all over them and that kind of thing. And you're like, okay, these were clearly used. And so making sure that you have a policy in place that identifies things before you take it back, because I think once you take it back, that's a challenge to then undo that process. So,
hey, Robert, can I offer something on that? This past year during the holiday season, and again, my apologies for the finicky connection I've got here. This was the first time that we saw kind of these limits being placed on returns. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but there were certain restrictions on how long it could be before you could return something that was purchased during the holiday season. And I thought that was really interesting, because to your point, Christian, we did have these very open and very kind of casual returns processes, and that had become kind of the state of the industry in a way, right? I mean, the retailers that were emerging and rising to the top were those that were just willing to accept returns at any point and at any time. I think we are seeing kind of a bit of a backtrack on that, and to be honest, I think that consumers are in many ways kind of warming up to that. We do see just some Just an interesting awareness of that. Back to the very beginning when we started talking, there is a lot of awareness about supply chain in today's marketplace. More consumers today are aware of supply chain issues. They understand supply chain much more than we ever did back in my early days as an emerging consumer. And so I will say that there's just a much more sophisticated consumer in the marketplace that understands that there is an implication of holding on to something forever and then deciding to return it. And so I do think that we're starting to see some sentiment and perspectives change in the consumer marketplace relative to things like returns, and even relative to just the overall fulfillment of orders, because today's consumer is much more knowledgeable, much more savvy, and much more concerned about what's going on in terms of supply chains behind the products that they purchase.
Thank you so much.
I'll give you a little extra to that one real quick, Terry, as I've seen a few examples where accounts have been closed, where, for online accounts, for online ordering, because they've had too many returns, and they could have great excuses for them or great reasons, and they're no longer able to use that platform anymore.
Yeah.
So, great. And that's a big consequence when you rely on some of those.
Yeah.
Great points. A little time check here. The depth of your examples and input is tremendous here. I'm going to go quicker here, 10 minutes on the last two, so I can open up for some questions here. And next topic, packaging for the profit and planet. Topics very, very close to my heart. I live this on both sides of the ocean in Europe and in the US, right? And I have a sustainability and a profit aspects of that. So Terry, just quickly here, from the consumer perspective, right? There's this publicized things on packaging, and people don't want to see their brand on a plastic packaging that ends up on the other side of the world in the oceans and stuff. And the brand, maybe it's a global brand, gets associated with that kind of waste, if you will. Yeah. So where is the consumer on this today? Sustainability and connecting that to the brand of the retailer. What is your research saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, the stats that I've seen on this, would suggest that while sustainability has been one of those things, I think, Christian, you alluded to this earlier, that, emphases on sustainability have kind of wavered a bit, right? I mean, we have seen, especially as we've navigated through some economic headwinds, being able to keep sustainability initiatives on the front burner has been somewhat of a difficulty, to be quite frank. But from a consumer perspective, the sentiments haven't changed at all. In fact, they're just growing, particularly as we see more of the Gen Z and Generation Alpha start to emerge in the consumer marketplace, especially with the disposable incomes to be much more impactful and influential consumers. Sustainability is at the top of what they're thinking about. They're very purpose-driven, very much so thinking about well-being of society. And so I would say when it comes to sustainability from a consumer perspective, the consumer market hasn't taken its foot off of the gas when it comes to sustainability. In fact, some recent data suggests that somewhere close to 70 to 80% of consumers globally would warm up to more sustainable solutions and would even be willing to pay premiums in order to be considered a more sustainable consumer. I had an opportunity last year in 2024, had an opportunity to be a Fulbright scholar, and I spent several months in Finland, an environment that's very, very sustainably focused and very eco-driven. And they have apps where you can actually track your decisions and kind of do a somewhat of an assessment of your purchasing decisions before you make them, to determine what impact that purchase decision will have on the planet. And so, of course, Europe is steps ahead of us when it comes to sustainability in the U.S. But I do think that these issues are emerging, especially as we see this younger consumer coming into the marketplace. So I do think the way we think about sustainability issues in supply chain, we have to keep pressing. Packaging, of course, is clearly one of those issues, but I think it even goes down to the way we think about delivery solutions, the way we think about, lead times in terms of order fulfillment. It's just the way that it is. And again, especially as we think about the changing dynamics from a generational perspective.
Thank you, Terry. Quickly here, Christian, I think this is a huge leadership topic that you have embraced and made MHI as a big part of their focused operation side of this with a SLAM initiative, scan, label, apply, and manifest. And there's a lot of profit motive to use the SLAM principle. So maybe just a couple of words what that's about and where people could go to learn more about that, because it's the biggest ROI you can get to go after the sustainability here. So a couple of words on SLAM there from MHI perspective, Terry. Excuse me, Christian.
Sure. So yeah, so we're seeing a lot of sustainability go into reducing just in the package area of being able to reducing carbon footprint by reducing space, trailers, being able to reduce the number of trailers. You've also got EPR requirements that are requiring extended producer responsibility, meaning the shipper themselves now have the same responsibility as the producer to reduce their footprint. And a lot of things that are around that are in packaging relate to the size of a shipping box compared to the item inside. Certainly consumers are tired of seeing giant boxes come with something very small inside that bounces around, and it doesn't seem to make any sense, right? Well, these things really go into operations, and a lot of operations can really take these kind of strategies and, they might pick directly into a right size box or into a poly bag or into something else that's either, a poly bag might be something that was ocean bound plastics that are used to make that bag. So it's already a reused, packaging that material that's already been recycled. And corrugate, getting into right size boxing and right size casing can be it's funny because we go from the grocery store, we used to go with plastic, and now we go back to paper. Paper is still more recyclable than plastic. And so a lot of those, one of the areas you mentioned what resources we have. If you go to mhi.org/SLAM, there are sustainability resources. MHI in general has a lot of sustainability resources. Our annual report, I think 2 years ago, was focused on sustainability, and there's a whole lot of sustainability resources on our site. So definitely a place to go and look for things.
Great stuff. So I'm sure the audience here probably loading up some questions here. So I'm going to go quick on the connected enterprise. And let's see also, Terry, you might get some more consumer trend questions here. But Christian, shortly here, you came away from a roundtable and this concept about a connected enterprise, right? It's a physical and digital world. What comes to mind there is data regarding those two worlds. So maybe a few points here. What you see is coming to the forefront in connecting your enterprise digitally and physically. A couple of points on that, Christian.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're focusing on across a lot of the groups is the visibility from end-to-end supply chain and then eliminating the need for touches or movements or things to get things where they need to go faster. One of the areas that the industry groups are working on is the concept of what we're calling WARP, which is warehouse automated receive and put away, so that you're not handling and touching things as manually as you were in the past, but really coming in, scanning, repackaging, kitting, putting bundles together, whatever it might be, and then going either directly out the door so it's available for orders that are already in place that's waiting on those, before going to inventory, but in a but having visibility immediately. Whereas in a lot of traditional facilities, it might take hours or the next day before you actually see the inventory that came in. And I think that those days have to be kind of come to an end. We need to get to a point where we can access that inventory at a more of a real time. And then that eliminates a lot of the need to have this inventory being built up because you don't have visibility or it takes longer for your product to be available. If you're able to access it more at more stages along the path, then it becomes a lot more, you don't need as much inventory to be there.
Thank you. This has been a tremendous conversation. I'm pleased to moderate this. I would say that Vargo, MHI, and OSU, we will love to keep the dialogues going with you retailers that are joining here. These are all what I consider roadmap items and a journey for us. So I'm going to start reading off some questions, and and I'm promising that the questions we might not get to, we will answer after the webinar and make sure that's part of the recordings that we will send out to you. So let's start with some questions here. We have about 8 minutes here. So it seems to be a lot of change that's needed to keep up with this changing landscape. So what recommendations do you have, Terry, on leadership, how to deal with the change management aspect of this? You went from customer-centric to consumer-centric. Wow. What advice do you have for leadership, retail leadership in this topic?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, and maybe this is a shameless plug for Ohio State, as we would love for you to maybe consider us as a source of talent. But the reality is that I think a part of this is really going to be leaning into your younger talent within the workforce. The reality is that these young people that are graduating from universities like the Ohio State University, I mean, they are ready to hit the ground running, particularly from a tech perspective. When we started talking about developing these sophisticated AI solutions, there were statistics that were coming out suggesting that 95% of AI initiatives were failing. And a lot of it had to do with concerns about the trustworthiness of the technology, people being fearful of the technology. Young people aren't really thinking that way. They're like, bring on the technology, I'm ready. So I do think that in order to really usher in the kind of change that's necessary to keep afloat and to stay contemporary, it does require some degree of leaning into that younger talent. One example that I heard from a company I was doing some work with, which I thought was fantastic, they kind of did what they considered kind of a reverse or flipped mentoring program. Typically, mentoring is viewed as senior executives mentoring young people. They flipped it. They said, we want our young people to mentor the seasoned vets. Help us to learn the technology, help us to warm up to using the technology, and bring us over the hump of starting to directly go directly to the tech, as opposed to thinking about things the old school way. So I do think one of the fast ways to embracing the change and building in that change is to lean into the younger talent within your organization and really allow them to maybe have more of a voice on how they think you should go about addressing these consumer trends in the marketplace.
That's great, Terry. And allow me to close this webinar here shortly, Christian, but this is your passion. I just want to state this thing about the workforce of the future, as you call it. That's a huge passion of yours. And I think Terry put a nice bow around that, but maybe a couple of comments on that, and then I go to close here. Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to focus on is not what the typical workforce we've needed in the past, but what are we going to need in the next 5 years and 10 years, and going out and starting to recruit for that now. We are what part of our economist talks over the last week has been just focusing on the demographics. We are going to have a large population of people that will retire in the next coming years, and we will have younger people coming up that are in middle school and high school that will be in the workforce, to backfill a lot of those roles. But our jobs will continue to grow, and we're still going to have a challenge there to fill those. And so automating is critical. Figuring out what your next generation of talent, what your talent's going to need to look like at that point. Investing in your community and in your local community, whether it's your local colleges, local universities, high school robotics teams, skilled trades that you're going to need. Those things will be critical moving forward. You've got to start working on your talent now. So I think people are taking a little bit of a breath, because I think hiring got easier in the last few months, but that's not long term. That's a short term, maybe a relaxed environment. I think we need to refocus on. This is something that will continue to trend and be very difficult to hire over the next few years.
Yeah.
Great. And again, I want to thank you so much. This has been a pleasure to have both of you here. You're representing some sizable organizations from the industry, both academia and Ohio State here, and MHI. It's a 100+ years organization dealing with this topic of retail and how the consumer purchases back in those days and today. And again, I will remind us overall, cross generations here, that's passion of mine as well. This is a once in a lifetime experience, this wave that we're going through. And I want to really compliment the retailers out there. You're asking for collaboration and working together on this journey. And that is, it's huge to have that mindset, to focusing on collaborating together to work on these key things that dealing with our supply chain and the consumer of the future. And it's really fun working with you as we go across generations, even within our families, we deal with our generations, and now in the workplace. So this has been a tremendous hour. It was hard to keep it within an hour because of the wealth of information we have here. So I want to thank everyone for joining. Look for some details following this webinar, and you get access to both myself and Terry and Christians and our organization as well. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and stay warm out there.
Thank you.